Hello, this is my study, and my name is Joshua Percival. My project and field research was about Japanese parks, and specifically about how they are used and what purpose they serve the community. To research this, I decided to select two of the parks here in Beppu. Firstly, I chose Beppu Park as it's one of the main parks in the city and is commonly used by a variety of people. The other park I chose to do the study in was Minami Tataeishi Park. This is another large park that gets a consistent amount of visitors. I chose this park due to the many sakura trees it has. This obviously changes the reason why many would come to this park. However, due to it not being spring, I thought this park would be an interesting choice, as it allows us to see how a park that is seasonally famous is used in the rest of the year. I had also thought to include Shonengahama Park, but I excluded it from the study, as this park is primarily used for sports teams and physical activities, and therefore not representative of the wider population. The time of year is an important thing to note about this research. It affected the results drastically, and I believe a longer study throughout the year would do a better job at understanding how Japanese people use and think about their parks. In order to minimise this, I visited both parks on warm winter days to replicate the rest of the year as best as I could, and for further fairness, I visited both on Sundays, as I felt this would be when the parks were at their busiest and the best data would be available. This leads us on to the locations themselves. When I visited Beppu Park, the first thing I noticed was how busy it was. There was a wide range of people all over the park doing a variety of things. The demographic was quite diverse. I saw many elderly people, young families, school children, and some in the age range of 20 to 35. The most popular age demographics were the elderly and young families. These two groups made up the majority of the park visitors. In addition, there was a number of activities present as well. A large number of people were walking as their primary activity. Often these groups were walking in pairs or small groups, and quite a few were walking with their dogs. There were a number of solitary walkers in the park as well. However, these were far rarer, and often these individuals carried cameras or were walking very quickly as a form of exercise. This leads me on to the second largest activity which was present, which was people exercising. As previously mentioned, many were walking swiftly as a method of exercise, with this being very popular amongst the elderly. Other forms of exercise here were cycling, running, and playing catch with a baseball. The park itself was precisely managed, with short-cut grass and a clear design aesthetic that seemed to roll with the natural landscape of the park, instead of imposing a design on the land. You can see this in the top right photos. The grass is very short, and the natural beauty is highlighted. However, there seemed to be very little wildlife aside from birds in the trees, which would be a recurring theme in Minami Tataeishi Park. Another interesting aspect of the park that highlights its potential uses was a sign that included instructions on how to appropriately walk in order to maintain fitness. This could explain the number of fast walkers. However, I believe that to be a wider cultural practice, as fast walking was very common in the other park as well. This brings us on to the next park in my study. Minami Tataeishi Park is a park of comparable size to Beppu Park, but despite this, on the day I visited, the park was very quiet, with a much smaller number of visitors, despite similar good weather on both visits. The demographic here was skewed towards the elderly. There was a young family and a young couple, but the vast majority of people there were the elderly, and amongst them, most were doing this fast walking while doing laps of the park. This suggests that, at least during this time of the year, this park was primarily used by older individuals in order to maintain physical fitness and potentially ward off the symptoms of bokeh. However, I will discuss that later in more depth. Despite that, a few did stroll slowly, and they often stopped to appreciate the flowers or other aspects of the park, suggesting the appreciation of beauty as another motivation to come to this park. The same ethos of design carried into this park from Beppu Park. While Minami Tataeishi had a great inclusion of water features and worked well with them, there seemed to be an attempt to flow with the natural landscape similar to Beppu Park. This brings me on to the first theme of analysis and links to the literature. According to Saito, within Japanese aesthetics there is a reverence for nature. It reappears throughout many pieces of art and even extends into the design of everyday objects. More so, this extends into the idea of Japanese gardening, in which gardeners are taught to not impose their will on the scenery, but rather to enhance the natural qualities of the landscape. In doing so, they allow the observer to experience the essential qualities of the object. This is replicated in the parks in Beppu, I would argue that the purpose of the application of this aesthetic is to allow visitors to the park to experience the essence of nature, while at the same time providing the convenience of urban life. To compound this point, an article by Mallow et al. Suggests that many park goers across the world use parks as a chance to experience nature. However, the actual experience of the park is a heavily mediated form of nature. The experience of an urban park and a true expanse of nature is vastly different, evidenced by the lack of wildlife found at the parks in Beppu. To conclude this point, I would summarise that the design of the parks allows the visitors to feel connected to nature while also reducing the dangers and hassle of true nature, and as such, illuminating a primary use of parks in Japan. A second theme that arose in my study was the use of the park by the elderly in order to maintain fitness later in life. The majority of this demographic that I saw during my fieldwork were participating in brisk walking as a form of exercise. This tracks with Trafalgar's article on bokeh. Trafalgar explains that bokeh is associated with a decline of the body due to aging, and unlike other forms of abnormal aging, bokeh can be prevented temporarily by physical or social activity. Further, in the article, an informant provides walking as a method to keep fit and fight off bokeh. Here we find another primary use of the parks in Beppu, as many of the people I observed were engaging in this activity. Furthermore, a large proportion of individuals in both parks seem to prefer activities that involve movement rather than static enjoyment. This is supported by Ozguna, as he outlines how cultures often fall into either side of the active or static park usage. However, here I would like to reconsider that the time of year may have had an impact on this outcome. Despite the relatively warm winter weather, a large number of the park goers may have thought that it was simply too cold to enjoy sitting for prolonged periods in activities such as picnics or reading a book. During the summer months, many more would likely have come to the park to enjoy the shade of the trees. In addition, during sakura season, many families may have come to enjoy the blossom and sit there and have picnics. Therefore, the conclusion that the Japanese prefer movement-based activities in parks may not be applicable without further study to find behaviour for the length of the year. As a final note, in both parks I attempted to talk to some of the park goers. However, my Japanese is not very good, and this limited the data I could collect from my informants. Despite this, the limited conversations I did have suggest an alignment with my observations, as topics such as maintaining fitness or admiring flowers came up multiple times. In conclusion, the parks in Beppu are used for an array of different purposes. The time of year likely has a large impact on the type of activities that occur. Despite this, my research suggests that Japanese people prefer activities that involve movement and physical activity. In addition, the aesthetics of Japanese life enable the essence of nature to be elevated by the design of both parks. This enables visitors to experience a mediated form of nature that creates a sense of connection, despite being in an urban area, and in a sense, brings nature closer to home. Thank you for listening. This is the bibliography, and these are my field notes.